Welcome to this series of short videos reviewing the basics of Greek morphology. This series is designed for those who are interested in reading ancient Greek texts. We're going to look at 12 core paradigms or patterns. And if you know these 12 patterns well and how they're applied, you'll be able to recognize the vast majority of forms you're going to find in the Greek New Testament and other Hellenistic texts. In these videos we'll hit the main points of basic morphology, and then you can find further details of this approach in the book Using and Enjoying Biblical Greek. We're going to begin with the definite article. This is going to be our guide to the first and second declensions. So here you see the definite article on the left and the noun and adjective endings on the right. Now recall that the feminine is the first declension and the masculine and neuter are the second declensions. The places where the endings differ from the article are represented in the 5 brackets there in the definite article pattern. So we have os, that gives us the nominative singular masculine ending, as in ha logos. And then on gives us the nominative singular neuter and the accusative singular neuter endings. Like ta teknon, then epsilon gives us the vocative singular masculine ending. Actually, usually the vocative has the same ending as the nominative. That's true in all the plurals and many of the singulars, but some singulars have their own ending, and epsilon here is the one that shows up the most, so it's part of learning basic Greek. Then finally we have the alpha, and that represents the fact that the forms in the singular feminine can have either an eta, like the article itself does, or an alpha. So let's look at those variations in the singular feminine a little bit more. You see some have eta all the way through, some have alpha all the way through the singular, and some mix them up. As long as you know these singulars can have either an alpha or eta, these differences don't really affect the parsings of words. The only issue is when you go back to the lexicon and try to find the lemma or the lexical form, it may have an alpha or an eta. And that's no big deal since either form is going to be in the same place on the page. So let's see an example. Here we see the eta sigma on the end of thalasses, and that could be the genitive singular, and the article in front of it pretty well nails that down. So when you go to the lexicon, you expect to find thalasse, but it's not there. Instead you find thalassa. And as always in the lexicon, like you probably remember, it'll give you the nominative form and then the genitive ending. And so you see here you have the shift between alpha and eta signaled by the lexicon. Now let's look at the implications of an alpha being retained all the way through the singular. Here's a paradigm of such a noun. Notice that there's an alpha sigma in both the genitive singular and the accusative plural. This is probably the main point of potential confusion in this whole first core pattern. Such nouns and adjectives usually have a stem ending in epsilon, iota, or rho, so think of them as air words. They're up in the air as to whether they're going to be a genitive singular or an accusative plural. So you need to be alert for clues as to whether it's a genitive singular or an accusative plural. So let's see how this works. I invite you to pause the video and see if you can spot any clues for whether oikias here in Mark 10:30 is a genitive or an accusative. In this case, oikias is in a series of other accusatives, and so that'll point us in the right direction for our parsing. Now see if you can spot clues in this passage as to whether oikias is a genitive or an accusative. In this case, it's the object of the preposition ek, and ek only takes a genitive. So if you recall that fact about ek, then you know what you're dealing with. And in any case, a lexicon will clarify if you're dealing with a noun that uses alpha in both places. Now that we've seen the basic features of this core pattern, let's see how it helps us identify words in a passage. I invite you to pause the video and locate all the articles and the first and second declension words in this passage from 1 Peter. Now compare what you came up with to the words that I've marked in this copy of the text. There are 53 words in this sentence, and 29 of them are marked. So around half the words are covered by our first core pattern, and that's actually typical of many passages. Now you may have marked some words that I've not marked, because there are some words in this passage that look like first or second declension words, but they're not. I doubt that you mistook kai for a nominative plural feminine form, but eleos and elpida, you may have marked those, but they're actually third declension nouns. And anagenesos and zoson are participles using third declension endings. and then apocalypteni is an infinitive. So we need to learn some further core patterns to sort out such differences, and sometimes we'll need a lexicon as well. It's actually a difficult part of morphology that some endings can be used in more than one way, in more than one pattern. So that's an overview of the main features of the first and second declensions, and I'm suggesting you become very familiar with this core pattern, and then you'll be able to sort out a lot of the forms you find in text. Here's a summary of what we've seen in this video. The definite article is the core pattern that provides basic endings for the first and second declensions, but there are important variations. One we looked at was that alpha eta shift in the first declension singular, which means some forms that have a eta in their ending will go back to a lemma that has an alpha ending, and that's usually not a big deal for finding it in the lexicon. And then nominals that have a stem ending in epsilon, iota, or rho usually have alpha sigma for both the genitive singular and the accusative plural. And so you have to watch for clues in the context to let you know which one you're dealing with. So now we've reviewed the main features of the first and second declensions and two important variations. And in the next video we'll review a few more important variations in these two declensions.